Good morning, Mount Hebron Baptist Church family. Hope you all have a wonderful Easter Sunday. I hope you've been safe over the last few weeks. I know things have been different and challenging perhaps, and there's been some very different times for us, of course, these last few weeks. Routines have been disrupted. But if you will turn with me to the book of John, chapter 16, I think we all know that even though governments and hospitals and manufacturers of products will have learned a lot of lessons from this virus and how things have happened since then, since this has all started, and they'll make long-lasting changes and improvements to policies, I think we all know that for the average person, things will return to normal. So even though we may experience some difficult situations with family members with this sickness and disease, some people are having to experience these things across our country. For the rest of us, our disruption, our anxiety, the disappointments maybe, and the frustration that we're experiencing, that will all go away. And if you look in John chapter 16 in the context of this, you see Jesus telling his disciples about, I'll be here, and then I'm leaving for a little while, and I'm coming back, leaving for a little while, coming back. He tells them multiple times through the middle of the chapter. And I think they're maybe having a little bit of difficulty understanding. They ask him in chapter 16, verse 18, a little while, and we don't understand what you're saying. So Jesus tells them again, I said a little while, and then you will not see me, and then again a little while you will see me. And he tells them in verse 20, verily, verily, I say unto you, that ye shall weep and lament. Ye shall be sorrowful. So when he leaves him, they will be upset and sorrowful, but your sorrow will be turned to joy. So when he returns, sorrow will be turned into joy. And just to make sure that they understood what he was talking about, look in John 16:21. A woman, when she is in travail or childbirth, has sorrow, because her hour is come. But as soon as she is delivered of the child, she remembers no more the anguish or the pain for joy that a man is born into the world, or a child is born into the world. So of course we all know childbirth can be a very painful experience. And Jesus is telling us here that if a woman can go through the sorrow and pain of childbirth, but then afterwards experience incredible joy and not remember the pain and anguish she went through because of the birth of this child, so too for most of us that are experiencing this frustration and this disruption to our routines, we will again return back to normal and experience joy. So I only can say to you, church family, as we return, hopefully in a few weeks, maybe a little longer, and just think when we're back in our sanctuary at our church, sitting together side by side and worshiping and being a part of the worship service, we're going to be experiencing joy. And all this that we're experiencing today will be gone and forgotten. So let us turn to Luke chapter 24 to begin our lesson. It's a wonderful thing, the Bible, it is. I remember years ago, one Wednesday night, Eric asked us what is the proof that God is real and that God exists. And I think a lot of us that Wednesday night were trying to think of some pretty profound things to say. But in the end, he said, by holding up his Bible, that the Bible is the proof that God exists. So it's a wonderful thing today that we get to read from the Bible. We get to read from it every day if we like, right? It's a very wonderful privilege we have. So we're going to read from our Bible today. So the context of our lesson, to kind of continue with what we saw in John, we see in chapter 24 of Luke. Verse 12, we see this is where Peter arose and ran to the sepulchre, and he saw that the linen clothes were laying there and that Jesus' body had departed, and he was gone. So then we pick up verse 13 with our lesson. So the context here is we have two individuals that are leaving Jerusalem. They're heading away from where this happened. It's 3 days after the death of Jesus. So to put this in context, the Jewish people of the day, they were looking to Jesus as the Messiah, as a prophet, as a very bold prophet in word and deed, very mighty. So I think they were looking to him. A lot of those Jewish people were looking to him for what he could do for them today. Think about this fall. We're going to be looking at electing more leaders into different positions all throughout the country in different states, and we'll also be looking at the office of the President of the United States. We're going to be looking at these candidates, and we're going to be wanting to know what they can do for us today. I think it's 100% guarantee that no candidate will state on a commercial or live during a debate, they're not going to say these words. When I die, I will do this for you, and after I'm long and gone, I'll do this for you. That is not going to happen. We're looking to these individuals for what they can do for us today. That should be our responsibility, to find out what these individuals can do for us today as humans. So I think a lot of these Jewish people during this time, 2,000 years ago, were looking, it's very applicable to us today. These people were looking to this leader, to this Messiah, to this prophet, and what he could do for them in his human life, in his human existence, what he could do for them today. We know he was going to do something far more greater and far more important than what he would do here on earth in his daily life. So that's where we pick up here. We pick up with these Jewish people and what they expected of Jesus. And here it is 3 days after his death, and nothing has changed. I think we know at his death, the moment of his death, that the curtain was rent from top to bottom, and other things happened, thunder and lightning, or the sun was darkened and things like this right at that moment. But then shortly after that, for this next 3 days, nothing has changed. Think of our society. Today we're not satisfied. We have all kinds of rules and laws in place now that a lot of us probably thought 10, 15 years ago would never, ever be in place. So we have these things now that people have wanted. We have this change, but yet nothing's changed. We're still not satisfied. So these people here were expecting great things, and nothing's changed. They're still not satisfied at his death. So I think we see these two individuals here. Let's pick up in 13. They're walking, and these are some of the things they possibly are talking about. This is the context of this period right here and what a lot of people were thinking. So let's pick up in verse 13. And behold, two of them. So two of them. So we just talked about Peter and his group of disciples. So these are two followers of Jesus. Went the same day to a village called Emmaus, which was from Jerusalem about 80 furlongs. Well, 80 furlongs is a fancy way of saying about 7.5 miles. So they had a couple hours journey, and the two of them were walking and talking. So look at verse 14. And they talked together to each other of all the things which had happened. So you can only imagine a lot of things they were discussing. They'd been in town 3 days after Jesus' death. He's gone. Nothing's happened. Nothing's changed. And they're leaving for some reason. They have some business in Emmaus. Verse 15, and it came to pass that while they communed together and reasoned, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. So now Jesus walks up from behind, from the side, from the front of them, whatever, and he joins their little party that's walking. But very quickly we see in verse 16, but their eyes were holden. That's a very highfalutin way of saying they could not recognize his face. Their eyes were holden that they should not know him. So however it was, however God did this, however Jesus did this, he approached them in such a way that they did not recognize him. Now I believe in the sovereignty of God, and by inference the sovereignty of Jesus. So I know he knows who these people are, and he knows what they were talking about. But look in verse 17. He gives them the opportunity to tell him what they were talking about. And he, that is Jesus, said unto them, what manner of communications are these that ye have one to another as ye walk and are sad? So now we see the first word here describing how they felt. An emotion, sad. Maybe he could see it in their face. Maybe he could hear it in their voice. But once again, this is Jesus, so he knows anyway. So there's some sadness here we see. And one of them, in verse 18, whose name was Cleopas, answered, said unto him, art thou only a stranger in Jerusalem, and hast not known the things which are come to pass there in these days? So they are kind of, I guess, maybe bewildered that this gentleman walks up to them and does not know the things that are going on in Jerusalem. They're just right outside town leaving. And so he's there. It's not like they've run into him hundreds of miles away. They've run into him just as they begin their journey, and they're like, really? You don't know what's going on. What has come to pass? Are you a stranger? Where have you come from? So they're a little bewildered, perhaps. So they will continue to talk. And we know, Jesus knows what they're referring to, but he gives them the opportunity to continue. So look in verse 19. And he said, that is, Jesus said unto them, what things? And they said unto him, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, which was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death, and have crucified him. So they're now telling Jesus. He said, what things, in verse 19? And they said, what concerns this man Jesus of Nazareth? Of course, they once again do not know who he is. He's just a stranger walking with them and talking with them. And so they refer to Jesus of Nazareth as a prophet, mighty in deed and in word before God and all the people. So they recognize him as being a prophet, a very mighty man. Once again, I think there were a lot of expectations on him of what he could do for them today. And they then are sad, as we found out earlier, because they say in verse 20, they tell him, and this man, this prophet, before God and all the people, the chief priests and their rulers in the town, they delivered him to be condemned to death. They brought him before the judges, as we all know, and he was condemned to death, and he was crucified, as it says in verse 20. So I think there's where some of the sadness is coming from. They're upset. They had high expectations for Jesus, right? Shame on them for not remembering how important this death was. And now it's 3 days later, so they should be expecting something. And that's what I think is amazing here. We're getting to read an account of Jesus Christ 3 days after his death. We're now reading about him talking to people. He's alive. He's talking to people. So now we see that they refer to him as a prophet, and they have great expectations, and then they're saddened. Our rulers, our chief priests, they delivered him, they condemned him, and put him to death. So it sounds like maybe these individuals weren't caught up into that mob that wanted to crucify him. Maybe, perhaps, but they seem to be sad, nonetheless, about his death, his crucifixion, his death. So they then reveal to him, to Jesus that is, they reveal to him, look in verse 21, but we trusted that it had been at which should have redeemed Israel. But we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. And besides all this, today is the third day since these things were done. So wow. So now we can maybe see a little bit of confusion. Maybe it's even disappointment. Bewilderment again. So they're telling Jesus, but we trusted in him that he was going to be the Redeemer of Israel. So going back to the beginning, we talked about the context of this. These individuals here, shame on them for not really remembering and understanding what it is that Jesus had to do. He had to die. But they're looking at this, and they're maybe a little frustrated, upset, concerned that he should have been. He should have. We know what his death did. His death did something for all eternity, but they don't see it that way. He should have redeemed Israel. So they are talking from the sense of he's done, and he didn't do something that he should have done. So I think here we saw that they were sad, and I think here we can see this, maybe disappointment or some confusion, some just not understanding all the things that have happened. They're leaving town for some reason, and they're confiding in this stranger about all these things. So I think stop right here for a second and think about the context for us today, putting this in context and applying. I like to do that in our Sunday school class each Sunday. I like to at least spend the last minute or two of each lesson and try to put it and apply it for today. I mean, a lot of times we're talking about things that happened thousands of years ago, sometimes 4,000 years ago. And it's sometimes hard for us to think about how that can apply to me when I go to work tomorrow, right? Well, I think what is so important to take away from this is that we as followers of Jesus, we as children of God, followers of Jesus Christ, we're saved, we're converted, we're disciples of Christ, however we want to describe it. We have no reason, being in this condition, being a saved, converted child of God, we have no reason to despair. We have no reason to be upset about the things that are happening in this world. We look to this world each and every day, and our leaders and our government, and we are looking at what can be done today. Yes, tomorrow, next week when I go to work, I have to just put my head down and do what I got to do to get through the day. Some days are going to be difficult for me as well as for all of you all. And as we live in this world, that's what we have to do. We have to get the job done. But as a child of God, I don't need to despair. I know that Jesus Christ's death and resurrection have done something amazing for me and for all Christians. These individuals here in verse 21 have missed this, and they even say at the end of that verse 21, and besides all this, it's been 3 days since these things were done. I think they're implying here that 3 days have gone and nothing's happened. So I just want to remind us as children of God, we don't need to despair. So I think about years down the road, I'm going to be retired, and I'm going to worry about what's it going to cost for insurance and benefits, and what's the medical situation going to be like in the healthcare system in this country. And then I have to stop and think, whoa, Jesus Christ was born, died, was resurrected in heaven to the right hand of God, sitting on the throne. And I'm going to get to live in heaven forever with him. So I don't need to despair. So then I might think, yeah, retirement, Social Security, these are things I've thought about years ago, and now I don't worry about them anymore, to be honest with you. Put my head down and get the job done each day. But then thinking about the future and thinking about the things of this world, and once again, thinking about, is there going to be Social Security for me and my family? Is there going to be things available 20, 30 years from now? And then I stop and think, whoa, Jesus Christ died and was resurrected and was at the right hand of God, and I'm going to get to live in heaven because of that forever. So as a child of God, as a converted person, I don't need to despair over things. So we talked about at the very beginning, back in John, there's difficult times. And I think we could even apply what Jesus was saying about the joy after childbirth. Just think of our whole life perhaps as a childbirth, but at the end, there's going to be joy. So I have to think about that. And I think about that more and more each and every day. And the things that I do each day seem to not matter as much anymore, or bother me as much anymore, because I think about what it really means to be a converted, saved child of God. So these individuals missed that here, I think. And so we finish up with verse 21, and when they said that, and hey, it's the third day since these things were done. And I go back to what they said earlier, that things were supposed to happen, they didn't. So they were, perhaps now a little disappointed, a little frustrated. So now, I think now there's a little bit of confusion. Look at verse 22. Yea, they're still talking to Jesus. A certain woman also of our company made us astonished. Surprised and astonished, which were early at the sepulchre, and when they found not his body, they came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels, which said that he was alive. And certain of them which were with us went into the sepulchre and found it even so as the women had said, but him they saw not. So now there's a little maybe confusion. Once again, shame on them for not remembering what Jesus Christ had taught, what they knew from the old scriptures, from the old prophets. So now they're even mentioning, hey, their women were talking about his body is gone. Certain women of our company, as it says, of our company, a group of people. They knew these women, maybe indirectly, and they came and told us that he is gone, his body is gone, and that they also saw visions of angels that told that he was alive. And certain of them which were with us went into the sepulchre and found it even so as the women had said, but him they saw not. So I think they're saying these things. They're mentioning these things. And Jesus is walking and talking with them and listening mostly. And so I think here they just haven't put two and two together. They haven't said our Savior has risen. They're just talking about how some women have told the group that he's gone. So I think they're still missing, and they're just missing out on everything, and they're still thought of Jesus as what he was going to do for them. So let's see what Jesus says here. So now we see Jesus, he's been very patient, very compassionate, and now he wants to talk a little bit. Verse 25, then he said unto them, O fools and slow of heart, to believe all that the prophets had spoken. Ought not Christ to have suffered these things and entered into his glory? So now we can really see Jesus talking to these individuals with a little bit of a sternness in his voice. He refers to them as fools. That is someone who just doesn't know, that does not have the knowledge, and that doesn't have the understanding. And the King James here, I have it translated, "O foolish and slow of heart to believe all the prophets have spoken." So they've missed out on what they should have known. They have not remembered for whatever reason, and Jesus is having to be a little stern with them here. And in verse 26, ought not Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? So he's telling them, remember, this is what Christ was supposed to do. He was supposed to suffer. This is a question. He says, ought not Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into glory? He's reminding them through a question. This is what Christ was supposed to do. So I come back to what I said earlier to put this back into application again for our lives today. This is just another reminder here. This is what Christ was supposed to do. And he was supposed to suffer and die and enter into his glory. So now I can go back to what I said earlier about now, each and every day. The things I might think about that might bother me in the future, the uncertainty, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, should not matter, because now I see Jesus Christ saying, this is what I was supposed to do, and I've entered into my glory. They don't know, of course, that this is Jesus, but they will soon find out. So now Jesus takes this opportunity to educate them some more. So look at 27. And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them and all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So now, still unknown to them as being Jesus, the Son of God, he goes all the way back, beginning at Moses, and talks about all the written words that have been recorded, and taught them about all the things that concerned Jesus. They don't know that he's Jesus, but now he's telling them all about who Christ was and what he was supposed to do. Now our lesson skips 28 and 29, but I'll just read those. And they drew nigh unto the village whither they went, and Jesus made as though he would have gone further. I think Jesus knew he wasn't going to, but he acted like he wanted to continue to travel. But they constrained him, they constrained Jesus, saying, Abide with us, for it is towards evening, and the day is far spent. And Jesus went in to tarry with them. So Jesus gave them the opportunity to be hospitable, and they offered for him to come in and stay, and so he did. And now here's where we see Jesus' plan to make himself known now. So look in verse 30. And it came to pass, as he sat at meat with them, he took bread, and blessed it, and brake it, and gave it to them. So at some point, whether he took it, or when he blessed it, or broke it, or gave it to them, maybe it's at the end of all that, or during all that, but 31 tells us, and their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished out of their sight. So here we can see Jesus now took this opportunity. I think it's a wonderful time they had here around the food here. Although it's not a full meal, it sounds like, but he came into their home with them, sat down with them. It's a special time to share a meal. Usually, between people, that's a wonderful time that people like to take that time to share a meal. And so he's doing that with them, and he took the bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them, and their eyes were open. And then that is when he made himself known to them, and he vanished out of their sight. And now let's continue to look. And they said one to another, did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us by the way, on the road, as we traveled, and while he opened to us the scriptures, while he explained to us the scriptures? So they say, wow. They looked at each other and said, did not our heart burn? Did we not really start to understand when all this was taking place, when he talked to us and explained to us and opened up to the scriptures? So I think they're acknowledging right here that they started to understand who he was. And it wasn't until that moment when their eyes were open in verse 31 that they completely knew who he was. And now you have to think they finally realized what the purpose of all this was. So now they were so excited about this. In verse 33, they rose up the same hour and returned to Jerusalem and found the 11 gathered together, and them that were with them, saying, the Lord is risen indeed, and hath appeared to Simon. And they told what things were done in the way, and how he was known of them in the breaking of bread. And as they spake, Jesus himself stood in the midst of them, and said unto them, peace be unto you. So our lesson ended in 32, I believe, but here we see they were so excited. They didn't even stay the night. They got up and went back the 7.5 miles back to Jerusalem, because now they really understood what it was. So at the beginning of our lesson, to conclude, the beginning of the lesson, these people apparently were part of the larger mentality of that society of the day that were expecting Jesus to do something today in his life, in his human life. They were expecting him to take care of some things, and he died, and things didn't happen. And they even talked to Jesus as a stranger on the road, and they said, gosh, it's been 3 days. I mean, look, it's been 3 days when they said that. And by the way, it's 3 days since all this is done. Nothing's happened. Maybe they're not satisfied, possibly with what Jesus said and the things that they knew about Jesus. And so then Jesus had to take this opportunity, still a stranger to them, and tell them that that was what Jesus was supposed to do, that was what Christ was supposed to do, suffer and enter into glory. Then he took them through the prophets and explained to them through Scripture about concerning all the things that Jesus was going to do and be, and what the real point of Jesus' life it was. And then they got to share a special moment with him in the breaking of bread. Maybe they completed a whole meal, we're not sure. But they sat down with him, and he broke the bread, blessed it, and gave it to them, and they realized this is Jesus. And it says here, our hearts burn within us, because he talked with us and explained to us and opened up the scriptures to us. And then I think at that point, they really understood who he was. And this is where we conclude the lesson, and the reason why today Easter is so important. As Eric had mentioned on the phone tree, I listened to it earlier today when he told of the circumstances that we're facing this next week, of course, with not having church services. And he mentioned, we need to make sure we realize that Jesus is alive. Jesus is alive. So now we can see that at the beginning of our lesson, perhaps, maybe they knew, but they were confused, they were bewildered, a lot of excitement, a lot of things going on, and these individuals had just missed out. They just were lacking in what all this was about. Shame on them for that, being there at this time and hearing all this and not remembering the things that Jesus told them. But Jesus took it upon himself to meet with these two individuals. And we can see there at the end of the lesson here, they were so excited because of their heart burning inside of them with all that they had learned. They decided not to even stay the night and traveled back to Jerusalem. And if you want to continue to read on the end of that chapter, you can see how they go back and found the 11 gathered. And they said, the Lord is risen indeed. Look at verse 31. The Lord is risen indeed. To me, that's like, wow, they finally realized it. You know what? We'd heard that. We were told that. We were taught that. Kind of forgot about it, lost sight of that. We're just so wrapped up in what Jesus could do for us today. He died 3 days later. Nothing's happened. Nothing's changed. And they realize, oh, wow, he's risen indeed. He's alive. And then they were so excited to be with that group of people now And Jesus showed up again in their midst and said to them, "Peace be unto you." And you can continue to read to the end of that chapter if you'd like. So I just want to say I enjoyed this time together. And I think more importantly is I'm looking forward to the time that we're going to have together in the future. It's not that long in the grand scheme of things. If you want to think of eternity, 2 or 3 more weeks is not that long before we can join together again in our sanctuary and be with each other and see each other. I think that's what's most important, right? It's not that we're at that building, it's that we're together inside of each other, with each other, looking at each other, worshiping together with each other, singing together, praying together, studying the scripture together. And so that will be sooner than later. And so we're looking forward to that. And I want to conclude with the idea that we definitely need to appreciate who Jesus Christ is when he was alive, but then also what Jesus Christ did in his death and resurrection. As we've already stated, he's alive. And so as a child of God, as a converted spirit, as a converted soul, I'm so thankful that I don't have to despair. I do not have to worry about the things. These individuals here, maybe more the group of Jewish people, they were looking to what Jesus could do, and they saw him die, and they were so concerned about, oh, he's gone, he's done, he didn't do anything for us. What was that about? What did we miss? Well, for us as Christians, we know that had to happen, and thank God it did. I remember when I was younger, I always thought, gosh, if Jesus just wouldn't have died. When we read that account of Pilate and all those, and that mob, and it was so close in the Bible. You read it and it's like it's so close that he was getting ready to get let go, and at the last minute they decided not to let him go and let somebody else go, and he was going to die. And I read that when I was little, and it was like, gosh, it was so close. It's so close. He could have gotten off of the death row. He could have gotten out of there. And it's like, well, no, that had to happen. And we read that in today's lesson when Jesus told them when he was a stranger and they didn't know who he was yet. He said, ought not that to be, that Jesus had to suffer and die and then to be raised into glory. So it had to happen. So I think we need to worship today. Thank God that it happened. Thank God that Jesus Christ died and rose again. Because he's not dead, he's alive. And I'm so thankful for that. I hope every one of you have a wonderful day. And to close, once again, can't wait to see everybody. I've seen a few people out and about running errands and things like that, and you holler across parking lots or across the aisles at the grocery store, and of course that's nice, but it's not the same. So I'm looking forward to it, just like a lot of you are, that to join again in worshiping in our church, hopefully in the next few weeks. So I'm looking forward to that. So I hope everyone has a wonderful day and happy Easter, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. Stay safe.